Good evening. So today we are going to talk about how we can calculate the condensing temperature, evaporation temperature, and degrees of superheat, which is required while doing a compressor selection in any of the softwares you want to use for sizing of the chiller. I'm going to go more deep into the Bitzer, but this rule is applicable to whichever compressor you're using, whether it is Scroll, Emerson, or you know, I'll be sticking to Bitzer for now. So let's say we have a case where we have to size a chiller, and for sizing the chiller, first question is why do we need the chiller? I mean, we need a chiller to cool down the process temperature to meet the process requirement, whatever it can be like in the cold storage, it will be to reduce the temperature of the ambient air to preserve the food. So in this case, it is to cool the temperature, the cooling or the coolant temperature required by the process is negative 31 degrees C. Now, since this will be a refrigeration cycle, we know the process requires negative 31 degrees C. So in the refrigeration cycle, if we are taking out the low temperature heat, we have to throw out of the refrigeration cycle some of that high temperature heat. And in this case, we'll be using a air-cooled condenser. So the ambient temperature is very important. And the most important ambient temperature is during the summertime. What would be the maximum ambient temperature? So that is given as 38 degrees C. The next important thing given is, okay, we are doing the cooling, but what will be the load of that cooling? So that is 110 kilowatt. Now, given these conditions, how can we calculate the condensing temperature, the evaporation temperature, and degrees of superheat is what we are going to dive into. Now, I've just taken a screenshot of how it looks like when we are into the Bitzer tool for compressor selection. Now, the first thing is already given to us. This is already given 110 kilowatt. We already know the cooling load is 110 kilowatt. So we already have one thing. The next question is about the evaporation temperature. So how do we calculate that? Now, there is a thumb rule which says for evaporation temperature, there is something called approach, approach temperature. So for a chiller, the approach temperature should be 35 degrees C, sorry, 5 degrees C minimum or more. So what does it mean by that? That means that if my process requirement is negative 31 degrees C, I have to have a approach temperature of 5 degrees C. That means my evaporation temperature should be negative 36 degrees C. Why? Or let me dive deep into what is this approach temperature? What is approach temperature? Approach temperature is basically the difference between the evaporation temperature minus whatever is the coolant process temperature required. So the coolant temperature required. Now, and this approach temperature is pretty much as a thumb rule fixed. It should be 3 degrees C or more than this. So what we did was, since our process temperature required, coolant temperature required is negative negative 31 degrees Fahrenheit, sorry, negative 31 degrees C. So we subtracted that 5 degrees C of approach temperature and we got 36, negative 36 degrees C. And that's what we put it over here as our evaporation temperature in the Bitzer tool. So now that we are done with this, we will jump on to our next requirement as an input, which is condensing temperature. How do we calculate the condensing temperature? Now note that we are given that the ambient temperature is 38 degrees C. Now, as we have the approach temperature for the evaporator, same way we have a thumb rule for the approach temperature for a air-cooled condenser, which has to be between 12 to 15 degrees C. So now we do the same thing, 38 degrees C plus 12 degrees C of approach temperature. That gives us 50 degrees C of the condensing temperature. So now we have got our condensing temperature as 50 degrees C. So we input that over here into the tool. And before I go forward, there is one more thing about the approach temperature. There are two approach temperatures. One is for air-cooled condenser, which is 12 to 15 degrees C. There is also an approach temperature for when we are using cooling water from the cooling tower or a shell and tube heat exchanger. In that case, we can go down on the approach temperature to 5 to 6 or more degrees C. But when it is a air cooled condenser, we have to increase, we have an increased approach temperature. Same thing is applicable even on the evaporator side. The approach temperature in this case, since this is a coolant, a liquid, we are cooling a liquid. So the approach temperature is 5 degrees C. But let's say we had a evaporator which is air driven, like a blast cooler where we are the on the evaporator, the medium that we are going to heat is air or a gas, then it will be 5 to 15 degree C as the approach temperature. So, this gives you an idea about, how to calculate the evaporator temperature, how to calculate the condensing temperature of the refrigerant. Now, the next thing comes is the degrees of superheat in the suction of the compressor. Now, the thumb rule is first thing, we have to give superheated gas to the compressor in the suction of the compressor. Why? Because we don't want wet gas. That means any droplets of liquid going into the compressor. So what we do is we give minimum of 10 degrees C of superheat. And this way we ensure that whatever is gas is going into the suction of the compressor has only gas in it. There is no liquid droplets or nothing like that. So I use a very good example to imagine a compressor. A compressor is more like our nose. If we put water into it, we feel uneasiness. The same way the compressor has affinity for only gas. We cannot put liquid in it like our nose. So that's the example I like to use it. I was taught this by someone else, so just sharing it. And I'm really thankful to the guy who taught me this. I don't remember him his name right now, but I'm really, really thankful and just sharing that information with you. So yeah. So let's get back to this tool. So the fourth thing that we have to input is the degrees of superheat. Now, degrees of superheat, I have kept 10 degree K Kelvin. So I think once we input these, we are done. We can use this tool to do a compressor selection for us. So now I'm going to do that, uh, along with you guys, if you're guys doing it. I'm just going to run it again and just show you that. So I'm running the Bitzer, let's say Bitzer software on online. And since this is a very low temperature, negative 31 degree C requirement, it's a very low temperature chiller. So I'll select the compressor as reciprocating semi-hermetic two-stage, and it has a gas already selected for me, R404A, and I want that. Now, the cooling capacity, like I said, it's going to be 110 kilowatt, and we have already calculated the evaporation temperature to be negative 36 degrees C. Good, I'm not taking the mistake of saying degrees F. And we have already calculated the condensing temperature of 50 degrees C, considering the approach of 12 degrees C. So I do that 50 degrees C, and I'm going to select degrees of superheat, suction gas superheat to be 10. Okay, it already had that. And now I wanted this to be like 60 hertz. That's what is available in my case. And I'm going to do a play or a calculate button. So you can see how I got this tool giving me a temperature profile and giving me the number of the or model number of the compressor. So I hope you guys have gained something from this. At least I struggled initially how to calculate the evaporation temperature and the condensing temperature. So I thought I'll share with you guys. Have a good day and keep learning, keep growing. Thank you.